Hi, I'm Alissa Baranik.
Hello, and I'm Liberty Lafferty, and you're listening to Girls Offset.
We're two best friends navigating life, both in and out of the film industry.
We both love Cinderella movies, Jesus, and bringing the Christian and female perspective to the table.
Gotta go. Girl talk.
Welcome to Girls Offset, and we are going to be discussing the Scarlet Pimpernel and Batman Returns. So before we get into that, though, Alissa, what are you listening to right now?
I'm a huge podcast girly. So one of my personal favorite podcasts is Fantastical Truths, and it's a podcast that has a discussion on just how Christians respond to film and literature and just the pop culture in general. What's, good and what's bad, and how do we dig through that and have discussions on that? What about you, Libby?
Yeah, I am reading a book called The Spice Road right now because I love fantasy. So it's a book about this young girl who grew up in a very cultured, sheltered, rich environment in the middle of some kind of desert, and they drink tea to have magic flow through them, whatever. So right now she's gotten, I'll give you little spoilers for the book, but she's gotten out of her comfort zone. She's gotten into a different country, and she's realizing, wow, they're just like me. Maybe I was raised wrong or something. So it's been pretty good. It's not my favorite fantasy book, but the best part about it is that I get to see another culture and see how they do their magic system, which I think is just really cool. All right, so let's go ahead and describe the two movies. So do you want to do Batman Returns since it was your pick for this episode?
Yeah, absolutely. So I chose Batman Returns, and I solely chose it because of the one scene where... Actually, let me just describe the movie. Why am I spoiling
yeah, please. Don't get too far ahead, yeah.
Batman Returns is the sequel to the Tim Burton Batman films. There's only two. So in this one, we have the introduction of Catwoman and Penguin, and Batman has to stop them from committing crimes, and it's Christmas. And Christopher Walken is there.
Yeah, I didn't realize it was a Christmas movie. I was like, Drew, we have a set amount of Christmas movies, and I'm like, we have to add this to the list. It is so Christmassy.
It is. All right, Libby, tell us about Scarlet Pimpernel.
Oh man, okay, so I like to read, and one of my friends suggested that I read the Scarlet Pimpernel, and she has this wonderful collection of old-fashioned books, so I read it, and I absolutely just fell in love with it. And then I was like, okay, there have to be some great movie adaptations of this, right? So I found one from the 1980s and one from the 1930s. I watched both of them, and I was like, these are my favorite movies ever. Especially the 1980s one, okay, I have to, once again, not get too far ahead of myself and talk about why I like it, but let me give a description. So the Scarlet Pimpernel is set during the French Revolution, and it's during this time called the Reign of Terror, where basically, they had destroyed the king, they've taken down, they toppled the whole empire, and they're like, what we're going to do is we're going to chop everybody's heads off. So the Scarlet Pimpernel is this English lord, and he's saying, you know what, I have a lot of friends that are aristocrats in France, and I don't want them to die unnecessary deaths because, well, there were a lot of people that were bad. A lot of people were just innocent bystanders, and they don't deserve to be they were cutting off kids' heads. They were cutting off everybody's heads. So he becomes this dashing and daring guy with a bunch of disguises, and he goes and he saves a bunch of these people. So it's a really fun adventure story about him saving people, but along with that, we also have the story of his marriage and his wife Marguerite. And it's really about their relationship and how he has to keep his identity secret from her, but then, it's her story of finding out and them getting closer together as a couple. And I just found the whole thing to be fantastic. So I was like, Alissa, I want to talk about this movie. And it also, this character was a big inspiration for Batman, for pretty much all of the major superheroes that we know of. And it was just a really wonderful story, so I wanted to share with everybody. So we chose these movies together partially because of that reason, I think, because we wanted to talk about the hidden identities and because of the history of the Scarlet Pimpernel. But yeah, let's talk a bit more about our theme of secret identities. That was something you suggested, Alissa, so please tell me why.
Yeah, it's actually a really weird reason. So I was at Libby's house, we were drinking tea, and Libby had just showed Drew the Swan Princess, and I was like, oh, I love that movie because I love the mistaken identity trope in it, and I'm a sucker for those. And then you brought up Scarlet Pimpernel, and then I brought up Batman because I'm like, well, Batman was inspired by the Scarlet Pimpernel. Yeah. So I'm just a sucker, and we'll talk about it more on my side, at least with Batman, with the idea of just hiding who your identity is, and, especially when it comes to romance.
Tell me why you love Batman so much.
Okay, this is a loaded question. I don't know. I just do. I think Batman's really cool. Okay, so Batman was huge in the 90s. I was born in the 90s. We had the animated series, the Tim Burton films, the later ones with Joel Schumacher, and then eventually we'd get the Christopher Nolan ones, which are amazing. I just love Batman. I love the concept of a story of just do like what Batman. There's so many variations of Batman, and that's what I like about it. Like you have the Adam West one, you have the Michael Keaton one, and you have the Christian Bale version. And I love that they're so different on their identities. Like Adam West, it's just a silly golden age Batman kind of storyline. With the Michael Keaton one, it's a man who doesn't really know if he can, he doesn't know who his real identity is. If he is Bruce Wayne and Batman's just his alter ego or vice versa. As to the Christopher Nolan version, where Bruce Wayne is like, no, this isn't me. This is a lie and I am Batman. I'm a man who's driven on vengeance. And I love just those different parallels you can take with the story, that there's so many adaptation ways of doing the story. And then the best part about Batman is the villains. Like, oh my goodness. The rogue gallery in Batman is no, there is no other superhero who has that good of a rogues gallery.
Oh, I completely agree.
Why do I love Batman? I think it's just because it's a timeless story of good and evil, but with a psychological twist. There is discussions about just not only just the villains and where their minds are, but also Batman. Because even in some ways, it's like you're no better than them. You just do what's right, but you're still someone who can't let go of their past.
Well, I watched this with a few of my friends, and one of them, who's a big, big Batman fan, he was in love with it, but Drew and I both hadn't seen it. I think Drew hadn't seen it. My husband, Drew, by the way. He hadn't seen it in a while, and I had never seen it before, and so I was kind of surprised because this movie was not what I was expecting. I really did enjoy it. I thought it was, like, really fun, and it was, like, very theatrical. It's a type of movie that was only made in the 90s, where they have this, like, everything is very flamboyant and like you're walking through a theme park. Like the only other movie I can compare it to if people have seen this movie is also The Mask. Fantastic movie, has another great jazz number that I just absolutely love that character too. So yeah, it was a very well-made movie, very like everyone was very committed and it was extremely fun. And talking about the villains, we gotta talk about Danny DeVito because I believed that he was the Penguin. Like, how some villains are like, oh yeah, but he was just like this like otherworldly creature. It was so funny. It was so crazy. Like his makeup. That's the other thing about the 90s is they have this, like they did not have the technology that we have nowadays to do things with CGI. So everything feels and looks and is very real. And oh my gosh, he was amazing. Like tell me about your feelings on the Penguin, please.
Okay, where do I start? I agree with you, yes. I didn't even think about it. It does parallel The Mask very well. And now I'm like, oh my gosh, The Mask would have fit in this also very well as Mistaken Identity.
We'll get there.
Yeah, of course. But yeah, one thing I will say about this movie is, and this is where the differences kind of come in, where the Scarlet Pimpernel focuses on the hero, Batman Returns is not a Batman movie. It is a Catwoman and Penguin movie.
That is the thing that I was going to say.
But to answer your question about Penguin, yes, Danny DeVito does a great job. He's having so much fun. And I just love how it's so easy for Christopher Walken. I don't remember his name in the movie. He just easily...
He's just a New York mob boss,
yeah. No, it's just so easy for him to trick him because the whole thing was Penguin's main goal is to kill the firstborns of Gotham. But then he gets distracted so easily and they're like, hey, do you want to be mayor? And he's like, okay. Like, once he sees women, he's like, yep, I'm good. And, like, everyone's like, what about the kids? He's like, we're still going to do the kids. I just want to see if I could, become the mayor of Gotham. It would be fun. It's so believable, that transition, that just snap to be like, oh, plans have changed. He's just so prideful and so full of himself and just so disgusting. Like, you hate him. You have no sympathy for him. Even though he has such a tragic backstory that his family rejected him, he's still like, I don't care. You're just vile and evil.
Yeah, he's so fun to hate. And he's just like he has a little stain of his butt crack in his like it's just they committed so hard to him. And I have to say, I totally forgot that his goal was to kill the firstborn of Gotham. Like, now that you mentioned it, I'm like, oh yeah, that was a major part of the movie, but I totally forgot it. I was just like, whatever, like, yeah, sure, he's gonna be the mayor now. Let's go for this. He has a flying... And the fact that That's how he kills Catwoman the second time. So he gets her on his flying umbrella, and then she falls into this glass. And then she screams. Okay, it's just, this movie is so silly, but I loved it. I had such a fun time with it. It was so good. I think. Okay, do you want to talk about Batman or Catwoman next?
What is there to talk about Batman? Let's go to Catwoman. She is the star of the film.
She is. I have to say, as much as I love the Penguin and I adore Danny DeVito's performance, and like he's breathing like, I'm like, oh my gosh, like it was so ridiculous. But I almost wish that the third movie had been about Penguin and he wasn't a part of it, because I think that you have Christopher Walken's character and Catwoman. That was a much more interesting story for me, and I feel like the Penguin just like, for a very good reason because he's phenomenal, but he kind of like took over the whole movie. But that just, I loved Catwoman. I loved that transition, and I think also like it really does touch on like what a lot of women went through in the 80s and in 90s of trying to get it in the workforce, dealing with a lot of sexism and not well-defined roles, where like I loved it, like where she's like, oh, I'm a secretary, oh, I'm an executive assistant, oh, I'm this and that. And it's like, it happens so often in the business world where we try to build ourselves up and say, oh, I'm at this level, but in actuality you're not being treated that well, and no one's really listening to her. So what did you think about Catwoman?
Oh my goodness, where do I start? I love her in this movie. And I agree, yeah, that's like, I think one of my favorite parts of the movie is just when she comes into her little apartment and she's like, honey, I'm home. And she's like, oh, I forgot, I don't have a husband. She's just so self-deprecating. And even when she becomes empowered as Catwoman, she's still a mess and she's aware of it. Like, she doesn't know, like at first you're like, okay, so she's become Catwoman, this is her. It's not, because a lot of people would say like, oh, this is a born sexy trope. Like, she's just confident and beautiful and everyone, she's eye candy, but that's not who she really is, because there's still that part of her that's like, I don't know what's happening. I don't even know if this is, I don't know who I am. I don't know if I'm still Selina or Catwoman or something in between anymore. Like, her identity is completely shattered. But I love that opening of just when she comes into the apartment and she listens to the voicemails and she just feels so broken because she's this woman who's like, I'm going to go into the business world, and it failed her. And she's like, I'm going to have a happy family, and it failed. She's everything that a woman dreams of in their 30s, and it all just fails on her. And she's just so sad and lonely. And she tries to do the right thing, and she ends up getting thrown out a window and almost dying. We get to the end where she is so close to where she could have normality, but she refuses because of vengeance. And that's the theme of all Batman movies, is vengeance. Even Batman, he does what he does because his parents died. And it's the same thing with Selina. She could have Bruce. She could have the perfect life of everything she wanted. She could have a job. She could be married to the richest man in Gotham who loves her and cares for her and is super strong and will protect her. And yet she's like, I can't, because the man who tried to kill me is still alive. And there's something so tragic, but also it's the part where she doesn't know who she is, which is a bummer, because after this movie, Catwoman was the runaway star of this film, and everybody knew that, and they wanted to make a movie with Michelle Pfeiffer that would have been a standalone Catwoman movie, and they didn't. And it's such a bummer, because I wish they did, just to continue her story.
I think what's so cool about Selina, and I think that's why I mean, like, the Penguin is great, but it's such a missed opportunity to really spend more time with her and more time with Batman, because it's such a good story about abuse and how abuse changes you. Because you're talking about all that stuff of how she is and I love what you said of, like, she's the woman that every girl dreams about being in their 30s. And honestly, same. It's like, yeah, I would love to be a girl boss and pursuing my business dreams, but how empty it's made her. And they really, like, it's almost there where they show that her boss, Christopher Walken, is abusing her and he's seeing her as like a sexual object. And so I think it's not like I want to see a woman be abused on screen, but I would have liked getting a little bit more into that, where like maybe he had abused her and then her becoming this like hypersexualized version is her trying to work through her abuse. And obviously it doesn't help, because you're right, she's still a mess on the inside, and as the movie goes on, that mess on the inside comes out more on the outside. And she's such a great character, and I agree. I wish that they had made another movie with her, because she was like, it was such a wonderful character arc. And then, yeah, that's one of my critiques of this movie, is I find Batman very disappointing. I felt like he was very boring, and like, I know that you said it's about the bad guys, but I was like, I would have loved to see a bit more of his interactions with Catwoman. There just wasn't enough there. So it's like, we can talk about all of these wonderful things, but I was just watching the movie. I was like, come on, Batman, like, do more. Talk about more of your conflict. It just felt very, like, life felt very easy for him. And you have such wonderful characters like the Penguin and like Catwoman, and I would have liked to see him play off that a little bit more.
Yeah, I agree. I would say that this is just not a Batman movie. He's just more of a side character. And I think a lot of that has to play with the director. It's Tim Burton. Tim Burton loves villains. He likes dark. He loves camp.
Yeah.
So, again, I think these films suit him very well in his directing style. But for him to come up with a story for Batman, I feel like it's a little bit harder for him. Now, having said that, this is the sequel. People already know enough about Batman to kind of go into this movie. Because I don't know, have you ever seen the first Batman with the Joker and Vicky Vale?
I haven't, but I definitely am going to watch it now because I'm like, I love this movie. And is the first one a little bit more like, you know, Batman centered?
Yes, because it's more of it's not like an origin story. He starts off as Batman, but it's a little bit more about him, the villain's Joker, and it's great. It's Jack Nicholson. And then it goes into his relationship, because they kind of mention it in the second one, because when he's with Selena and they're sitting by the fire, and she's like, has there ever been like another serious relationship? And he's like, well, there was Vicky. Vicky is the love interest in the first movie, and for the whole movie, he struggles to tell her, because she's kind of figuring out, hey, I know you're hiding something from me, and this relationship can't last if you hide it from me. But he doesn't want to tell her that he's Batman, because he's like, I don't know how to do that, because that's just so crazy. And at the end, they figure it out, and you think, okay, they're going to live happily ever after. But in this movie, he's like, no, it didn't work out, because the fact was something had to give, and I wouldn't give up Batman. And that's hard, but that's part of Bruce's story. I will say, yeah, Bruce is not in this story enough. It should not be called Batman Returns when it's really not Batman's story.
It's Catwoman Rising, and the Penguin, so Penguin runs for mayor, Penguin for mayor. Like, honestly, why don't we just name it that?
I love how dumb the people of Gotham are.
Oh my gosh. They're not, that's why this movie is so theatrical, and like a lot of the things that just kind of, and like, oh, sorry. Just remember the ending where he's like talking to his penguins in like this amphitheater. Oh, this movie. It's so silly, but it's very captivating. So I enjoy it quite a lot.
Yeah, it's a weird movie, but like you said, I know you kind of were like, what if we had separate films for Penguin and Catwoman? I don't know if Penguin could hold the film with Batman, because it's just so ridiculous.
He is, yeah.
That you have to have that grounded force, and I think that's, and the heart. Because I think, like, the heart is Catwoman. The heart and the groundedness is her story. So as much as, like, I'm like, no, Danny DeVito's perfect, he could not hold this film on his own. It would be too, like, when he kidnaps the babies in the train, you're just like, what is this? Like, again, in the Book of Exodus, the murder of the firstborn child is so terrifying and scary. In this, it's like a joke. It's like, oh, I'm gonna kidnap the babies and throw them in the lake. It's like, in your magic train? What? With the monkey?
I have to say, though, I do love his costumes. Like, I know that we've talked about the dirty onesie, but also, whenever he's, like, dressing up to be mayor, I'm like, I would wear those clothes. Like, I love his top hat. I love his overcoat. Like, his costuming is fantastic, although he does need a little help with his hair care. Like, you know, we gotta, whenever we get a hair care sponsor, you know, we gotta say, hey, here, mister, you know, try something like this.
I love the part, because again, I hate Penguin, he's such a jerk, but man, do I clap for him when he bit that guy's nose, because it was so well deserved, because they were just so mean to him, and he's just like, okay, have you seen a guy, well, at least my nose isn't bloody, and he's like, what? And he just goes right in, and I'm like, yes.
I wonder if that was like Tim Burton had experienced those kind of people in Hollywood, and that was him just like getting it out of his system, you know? Here, take that, I'm publicist, I'll bite your nose off. Look at where I am now.
It definitely makes sense with Tim Burton's personality, because he always, I feel like nowadays it's different, but I think back in the day in the 90s, he definitely saw himself as an outsider, and that's why I think he liked the character of Batman or the villains, because they're outside of that universe. They're not a part of Gotham like the rest. They're not like, because everyone in the town of Gotham is so alike and bland and the same, and then you have these out there characters, and I think that's where Tim Burton feels like he belongs, because a little bit about his story, he used to work at Disney, and he hated it because he was big in The Fox and the Hound, and that's just not his style, and he tried. They said, hey, if you want to try to make your weird stuff, we'll help you finance that. And just Disney and Tim Burton were just not on the same level, and they parted ways. And now, of course, they're best friends because he made Night Before Christmas, and everything's great and Gucci now. But yeah, I think he definitely puts that in there. So I love that you can see the director's style at hand in that film. And I think I love that about every Batman movie, that you can see the director's hand at work.
That's so fascinating, because I didn't really know a lot about Tim Burton, but it does make sense of why he would be drawn to the outside or the weird or something. And you said that he made Fox and the Hound?
He worked on it. So he wasn't a director, but he was an animator, because he actually got his start at Cal Arts. So he was working in animation, and it kind of just didn't pan out. So it's interesting. If you can, there's a few of his older short films on YouTube. Like there's a Hansel and Gretel he financed with Disney. And again, they do not fit the Disney mold at all, and that's why he left. But there is something really interesting about them, because it is his style, and it still has that camp, but it's just a dark camp, and I really like that. But I think we've talked enough about Batman on this one. Okay, so your thoughts, or our thoughts, on Scarlet Pimpernel. So why did you pick, I mean, I kind of have a feeling why you picked it, but tell me more of why this was your pick for Hidden Identities.
I think I'm not like a big Marvel person, and so I think when I think about Hidden Identities, the central relationship in this movie of like, and talking about romance and talking about when you fall in love with someone, how honest are you? And even when you get married, like a lot of, like you get to know somebody so much better after you marry them. And so it all relates to that with the Scarlet Pimpernel. Not only are you having the disguises and the daring adventures, but you have the central core emotional relationship. So that's probably the reason why I thought this movie was a good pick for this theme. But also, I just love this movie. Like, I could watch this movie over and over and over again. But yeah, so if you know anything about, like the Scarlet Pimpernel, that kind of man is the kind of man that I love. I love the drama. I love the crazy, fun outfits. I love a man that is okay to be flamboyant. And also, like, you know the scene where, like, he brings the basket and he, like, hides her view with his hat or whatever? And, like, he's, like, trying to surprise her with the basket? That is Drew. Like, Drew does that a lot. So, like, obviously, there's reasons personally why I love this movie. But I just think it has that depth of the marriage and emotional drama. And I think, I hope I'm not, you know, saying anything offensive, but I do feel like out of the two movies of this one's a little bit more, like, emotionally has more emotional depth than Batman. And part of that is because of Batman. Like, I wish that Batman had more of that. And the Scarlet Pimpernel, on his side, there is that emotional depth with him and with Marguerite, where they do that typical movie thing, of course. They can't talk to each other about their feelings, you know, because everything's too high stakes or whatever. But they're both going through that, and they're both learning about each other. But yeah, I'd love to hear your opinions on this movie, because you hadn't seen it before. So please tell me.
Okay. So I have seen it before.
Oh, did we watch it together?
I watched it in college with my roommate, because my roommate loved this movie. So yeah, it was my junior year of college, my roommate's like, I want to watch this movie, and I owed her one because I made her watch Penguins of Madagascar with me. So it's a great movie. I don't care what anybody says. Anyway, so we watched The Scarlet Pimpernel. So this is my second time seeing it. But man, when he said "Sink Me," I was like, oh, that hit a core memory from college. Because after seeing it the first time, me and my roommate were like, "Sink me, sink me."
It's so fun. Drew was like doing a little impression while we were watching the movie, and I had another group of people with us. They were all dying. It's just like, it's so imitable, you know?
So yeah, I will say, like, I agree with you. Yes. The Batman in Batman Returns is definitely lacking, where the Scarlet Pimpernel exceeds in that, of having the main character be the focus. I will say though, I liked the movie, but it wasn't, I don't know why watching it this time, I did find it a little bit too long.
Oh, I completely agree. Yeah.
It felt a little bit too long, and I don't know, like, the quality of the film is a little bit less, because I'm assuming they had a smaller budget. Was this a theatrical film, or this go straight to TV?
It was a TV film, so you can really tell that it's meant to be, like, paced for two-hour segments, you know? And that's why, like, it's very well written and well plotted out, in my opinion, but it is very long. So even though I love this movie, and I will watch it 100 more times, but I agree with you. Like, it really stretches things out. And also, like, the music, for some reason, is really loud, so it's kind of like a very, like, slightly uncomfortable experience watching it, which, I mean, like, it sucks, because I love this movie, but yeah, I agree with you. I did notice that too, even though I'm like, this movie has no faults, but I'm like, but it does have some faults. It's okay.
I mean, if it was technically meant to be a miniseries and they just cut it into a full film, I don't blame that entirely, because it was meant to be viewed in separate sittings. So I think that's fine. I will say I'm usually able to shut off, like, okay, if a film doesn't look the best, I can usually turn that off if I'm enjoying the story. This one, I could not turn it off. Like, it was just, like, the part at the end when the boat is coming and the guy looks out the window and it's like, well, where the boat is and where the building is, they are in the middle of the ocean. That doesn't, they are sinking.
No, Lisa, don't say it. I don't want to hear it.
That's why I'm like, I'm being nice. I don't hate the movie.
No, please, be as mean as you want to.
I don't hate the movie at all. I think it's a very good story. I don't know why this time watching it, I was just a little bit like, come on, come on. I mean, costume-wise, I love Marguerite's dresses. They're great. And I love the disguise. Like, that was like the highlight of the movie for me because I forgot how much he disguises himself as different, what would be considered undesirable characters in Revolution France. And it's just, he does such a good job playing those characters, but just the costuming and just the way they get like those heists done, like getting the little boy and all those things. It's just so fun and entertaining. And I'm currently working on a book, so that just I'm like, oh my gosh, I forgot we can do disguises. I love disguises.
Yeah, that's awesome. Oh my goodness. That makes me really happy because I think like Anthony, what's his name? Anthony, I had it written down here somewhere. I think it's Anthony Adams is the guy who plays him. And it's so interesting because he hasn't done a lot of stuff, you know, like this is one of the biggest things that he's done. But he is such a talented actor. And like this movie, some Pimpernel movies, they try to like keep it a secret. And in the book, they try to keep it a secret of who the Pimpernel is for quite a while. But with this one, they just said, you know, we're going to tell you right away who he is. But even though you know, you still see him in his disguises and it's like a whole different person. And like that must have been so much fun. And what I will say for both of these movies is I can tell that everybody making it had a lot of fun making these movies. So I'm like, that's an important, nice thing to know about these ones. And also, can we just like say something for young Ian McKellen? What did you think about him?
I thought he was fine. Like, I'm not saying, like, I don't want to be mean, but that man doesn't, like, his face just never ages.
He's telling me he looked like an old man, Alissa.
Yes. I mean, he had brown hair instead of gray hair. Mm-hmm. He was not Gandalf the Grey. Okay.
Did you think that he was, like, evil, though? Like, did you get the evil vibes from him?
Yes. I mean, he's a great actor. He's fiendish. He's mean. I think, like, I mean, I've seen the movie before, but, like, I'm not saying that, like, oh, I agree with him, but he is a complex character where it's, like, technically he's fighting, you know, he's killing the bourgeoisie because he believes that that's what's right for France. But he also shows that there is corruption in that because he plays a lot of games and he's like, well, I won't kill that one because he snitches, and I won't kill that one because he does this. So I feel like he is a very well done antagonist. But when he's about to sword fight with the Scarlet Pimpernel, I'm like, or Percy, I'm like, I think Percy's gonna beat you there.
I loved how they really made a lot of like themes and like things going through the whole script, and like as soon as Percy meets him, he like critiques his clothing, and you can see him consciously like touch his tie, or like you can see his outfits actually get better throughout the whole story, but it's still never good enough because he's just not as fabulous as, you know, Sir Percy. And then so like through the last duel, he's like slowly undressing him and like cutting off his buttons and everything. I think it was tense. I think it was like obviously it was held back by some budget things, but definitely I liked that there was a sword fight. I wish we had seen more, because some of the action scenes were kind of like awkwardly shot, and I'm like, in the books, like Percy is really, really good at getting away from people, and there was a great opportunity to like show up, but I just think that whoever was the choreographer, it's like they only hired him for that fight scene at the very end, even though there might be some lack of tension there, but like the other ones, I was like, they could have shot this a little bit better, could have choreographed it a little bit. It's just awkward.
I agree. It does feel like, because I know in the beginning when Percy saves Marguerite's brother, there's a bit of a fight, and I was like, all right, I like this. It's previewing more sword fighting and stuff. And like, no, the rest of the quest they go on is just, you know, we solved it through the power of negotiation. And I'm like, oh, I need something else. Yeah. You've read the books, though.
Yes. And I would say I find this movie and some of the choices they made to change for the movie, they actually made it a lot better. But that's the thing, is the way that the books described him getting away from, like, basically the ending of this, because it's kind of like two books put together, and I haven't read the second book that it's also based off of, or also pulling material from. But the ending of the, like, Scarlet Pimpernel, it's set in this, like, one barn house, and it's just not as thrilling as a sword fight and rescuing the Dauphin and everything. It is more of that like negotiation and him like I think like throwing powder in people's faces or something and like doing his like little thing like swirl thing with his cape or something. So this movie is definitely an improvement over that. But then there are other scenes in the book that show him getting away a lot better in more inventive and fun ways that I think they just didn't do as good a job in this movie. But it's fine because that library scene is amazing. Now, okay, for the emotional involvement, like I felt like I know that it's a stretch of the imagination. I know that it is that she would not recognize her husband's whispering voice. I think the only thing I can say is that they probably just don't talk to each other that much. But that scene is so emotionally like it's strong for me because I'm just like, oh, you guys are so close, and I think what I love about their disagreement is that they're two married people that are upset about good things, you know? And so when they finally start falling back in love with each other, they realize that, oh, the things that we thought were pulling us apart are actually reasons why I love you more. And I thought that was very rare with things. So I know we're pivoting away from the action scenes, but that's something what I would say, like, when I say, like, this movie has more emotional depth, I love that it goes into that because marriage in film is really hard to talk about and to do well without it being boring, because there's a lot more movies that are about the build up to marriage and finding the right one and being with them. But once you are married, it can be a lot more difficult narratively to make it interesting with two people that are married. So I thought this movie did a great job with that, where it shows how people can be drawn apart, obviously with a very like tense dramatic situation that doesn't happen with a lot of other marriages. But that's one of the reasons why I love this movie is, you know, it can show me that you can have these differences in marriage, and if you're really trying to be good, upright people that are concerned about good causes, you will have difficulties and you'll have tension. And I'm not perfect, but I think it's that aspirational quality of like they will be drawn back together because they're both good people. So that's what I love about that library scene. I don't know. How did you think about their marriage relationship?
I agree with you. I like that what you said where it's hard for films, I think, to do stories with married couples. So that's typically why if they make a sequel, they're usually separated on a break.
Or someone's dead. Yeah.
Yeah, and then like they come back together at the end because they're like, of course we're in love. And I like that the story just kind of was like, no, we're going to focus the second half on just their marriage. And I think that is very impactful, like you said. I will say I'm a little frustrated that the whole issue could have been solved if they just talked about it. But Percy's like, no, she wouldn't understand.
She will never find out, and I'll love her to the day I die.
I know, and then everyone's like, even her brother's like, why don't you talk to her? Because that doesn't really sound right that she just wrote that letter. And he's like, no, I'm not gonna do it. So it's a little... especially because like when they go to the party and they call her out and she's like, Percy, will you defend me? And he's like, nah. And I'm just like, dude, like I know you're upset because of what you think happened, but that's not. So I don't know. I do like their marriage, and I love just, especially when they like dating, I guess, or when he's like flirting with her. It's super cute and sweet, but it's just that communication thing just frustrates me so much. So I want to pivot a little bit back to Batman on my favorite romantic scene, and that is when they go to the masquerade ball. And everyone wears a mask except Bruce and Selena, of course.
Yeah, I didn't even notice that. I was paying attention, I promise, but that is a cool point.
So they do the dance and they say the mistletoe part. So like if we go back to when they have their first, I think it's their second fight, they see mistletoe, and mistletoe, I forgot what it goes, but basically like, oh, mistletoe is deadly to eat. But if you kiss under it, a kiss is more deadlier. So when they dance, the mistletoe is above them, and they say the same quote, and they realize, oh my gosh, you're Batman, you're Catwoman, and they're just like, what do we do? And they're like, we gotta leave. And it's just like that part of like that, just that they were like the whole time for this movie, they're in love and they're building that relationship, but they know it won't last because they're both hiding secrets. And they're at that part where they're so close to finally having like that kiss, and then it's just like, well, they've kissed before, but like having that kiss under the mistletoe and then just being like, oh my gosh, you're that person. And it's just that heartbreaking part where it's like, we can't be together. And like Batman wants to make it work, but Selena's like, no, it can't happen. So it's just, I find that part so tragically romantic. And it's just like, it's that tragic Shakespearean love story where it's like, they can never be together. Now in the comics they end up together, but in this movie they cannot be together.
Yeah, and I just wish, because they do kind of kill her off at the end, you know? And I'm like, I feel like And that happens a lot with a lot of relationships that, you know, people go through. And even like, I'm sure with both of our lives, it's like you have certain people that it just wasn't the right time, or it wasn't the right place, or you weren't in the right place, you know? And so I think there's always that part of life where things just don't always work out. There's still that romantic part of us where people, you still hold on to those memories and you say, man, like it stays with you, and you are in love with the possibility of something having been happened, you know? Yeah, that is super tragic, but I think it relates to her going through so much abuse and her having been pushed too far on it. Well, pushed literally out a window, but just being pushed too far to be able to believe that for herself, and how a lot of women and men go through that where they aren't able to come back from something like that.
I mean, yeah, because before that scene happens, she pulls out a gun and she's like, I'm gonna go kill him. And Bruce is like, you cannot kill him. And she's like, don't tell me what to do. And he's like, well, what are you doing? And she's like, I don't know. I don't know who I am anymore, but I have to kill him. And then they have their little dance because he's like, come on, Selena, let me distract you. Let's dance. Please don't kill anyone.
Yeah. Does Batman ever end up with anybody in the Tim Burton movies, or no?
The way it works is they made these two with Tim Burton. I mean, technically in the first one he ends up with Vicky, but then in this one they're like, nope, Vicky doesn't exist anymore. So after this one, they do not let Tim direct the next two because I think he's a producer, but he's no longer allowed to direct because I think I told you this earlier. When they advertised Batman Returns, they advertised it as a children's film. There was even a McDonald's toy tie-in, and people were upset because it's not a children's film at all.
No, it's not. Yeah. I think that's something, I don't know if I mentioned that earlier, but I was very shocked. Like, I was just not, like, it's, and I was going to say, like, it reminds me of a lot of A24 movies where there's a certain amount of playfulness with it, but there is also quite a lot of sexual content in it. You know, and this movie isn't, like, over the top, but it's enough where I'm like, I wouldn't want my child to see this until they were at least, like, 15 maybe, you know? Because, like, those references would go over people's heads, and they do, but I was just kind of, like, sitting there, like, what the heck is happening? Like, this is what?
I know, like, the whole conversation with her and Penguin is just so sexually charged. Yet, like, you know they're not into each other, but it's still like, oh my good. Like, I love the shot where they're having the discussion and they have the little bird in the cage, and the way it's set is like, Penguin is in the cage because that's how the camera's looking, because it's from her perspective, and she's the predator staring down at him like she's going to eat him. Yes. And they have this whole monologue, and it's so good.
Yeah, I do remember. I love that scene. It's just like, and she's so like, it's such an interesting thing of like a woman being empowered in her sexuality, but it also like it's not a hell, like it's not hell, like it, I don't know how, like I don't want to like come across of like personally, like from my belief of being. Like, you know, I'm married, but I also feel like there's a certain amount of where I don't have to display my sexuality, you know, for the whole world to see as a form of empowerment, as a form of getting attention from people and feeling like, oh, I am trying to figure out how I want to say this.
I think one way I'd go about it is just saying, like, she became what the world projected her as. Her boss treated her like an object. If you listen to the voicemails, besides her mother, there's like, which is weird. I didn't know in the 90s, like, people selling perfumes would call you on the phone.
I know. I think that probably did happen. I guess we were just too young to like be the ones that were answering, but it makes sense that they would have like your number would be listed somewhere. Like, I mean, we get spam calls all the time. It just happens to be on our personal phone.
Yeah, so when she gets those voicemails, like a bunch of them are always like, oh, be the hot girl at the office, try our perfume, especially because she gets one of those like right after she fell out the window. So she's just like she's like, enough. So I think in some ways she's like, fine, I'll be what the world wants me to be. I'll be a sexual object, but I'm in control now. If that will give me control, then I will be that. That's how I view it.
Yeah, and then I think too, it also shows that doesn't fix the problem though, honestly. Like, it feels like it's too far and it's not her being true to herself. It's really interesting how the movie shows her going on in that way, of how at first she enjoys it, but then as the movie goes on, she just keeps getting used and abused by more and more people, you know, the more that she is leaning into being sexual. And it's something that I know in Hollywood, like, they're very pro that, and they want women to be empowered, and I want women to be empowered too, but not in that way where they're just, it's almost like she's opening herself up to more abuse, and she's just putting herself in more dangerous situations.
One scene where the woman gets, I'm assuming she was getting assaulted by the robber in the alleyway, and Catwoman stopped him, and then she said, thank you, and she's like, you made it too easy. And I have mixed feelings about that, because on a part of me, like, I'm like, I'm like, yeah, I mean, you shouldn't have been you don't know what the situation was, but it's like, I don't know. I have mixed feelings about the sexuality thing. And I have such mixed feelings about that comment where she just says, you made it too easy. Because if anyone should say it, it should be her. But still, you know what it's like to be in that situation. You need to be kinder to her. So it's complicated. What do you think?
It is. No, it is complicated, but what I would say is that Catwoman isn't someone who I think we're not supposed to look to her as someone who is empowered or who is embodying the right type of belief in herself. Like, I think that is something that happens with women, is that we assume a lot of these dangerous mindsets of, oh, well, it was her fault, you know? And so I think that when Catwoman says that, it doesn't bother me because I already look at her as someone who isn't in a good headspace, and her doing this is not her at a good place in her life. It's not her transforming into a more empowered, well-informed, confident woman. I feel like she's honestly more insecure when she becomes Catwoman, and she's taking it out on men and on other women. And I think that's something that happens a lot with women, and a lot with women that have had to go into the workplace. Like, there's a really interesting short that Pixar made called Pearl, and I mean, it really shows that, where it shows a woman who, like, literally, it's about, like, a little knitted character, so she's like a ball of wool, so she, like, knits herself into being more masculine, and then when she sees another woman entering the workforce, and she's like, the Pearl has been the only woman in the whole room, you know? And then when a second woman arrives, she almost treats her how she was treated, you know, because she thinks, oh, well, this is what I have to do to survive. And the story is about her breaking that pattern and not getting into that. And I think as women, we went through a whole generational thing of, like, the not like other girls trope. And even I grew up with that, where, like, I didn't want to wear makeup when I was a kid and stuff because I didn't want to be seen as, like, all the other girls that, like, needed makeup or needed this or that because I was different, you know? But then in that that whole belief is a different type of misogyny, you know, internalized misogyny. And so when I hear Catwoman say that, I think, yes, it is wrong. And I think that it just shows what a broken person she is.
That's a really good... I've seen Pearl, so I know exactly what you're talking about. And yeah, I think that is a really good perspective that, yeah, I think that is right. She is broken, and she's just putting her hurt on everyone else. So yeah, all right. Let's talk about a little bit back on Scarlet Pimpernel.
Yes!
Yeah, come on, we're talking about Batman too much. Okay, but, like, how does your faith, or, like, what biblical truths do you get out of Scarlet Pimpernel, you feel like?
Well, I think his whole character, I was thinking about this, his whole character kind of reminds me of Jesus, where, since, like, there's a really good, like, C.S. Lewis quote where he compares it to somebody parachuting into, like, Germany, you know, in the middle of World War II, and it's, like, this secret identity, because Jesus was constantly telling people, like, oh, you can't tell them that I'm the Messiah, you gotta keep it quiet, you gotta do this, do that, you know? And I think with the Scarlet Pimpernel, of him doing such high stakes things and playing these characters, and Jesus, in a sense, like, I'm not saying that Jesus was playing a character, but I do think that he definitely went through a major he became a human being, you know? I was going to say, maybe, I don't want to get into any, like, deep theological missteps here, but the point that I'm trying to make is that Jesus left his place of safety and security and glory, you know, and joined us on Earth so that he could save us. And I think Scarlet Pimpernel is the exact same thing. He never has to go back to France if he ever wants to again. He literally is best friends with the Prince of Wales, you know, the highest authority, because at that time the Prince of Wales, either around that time or just before or just after, he basically becomes the king, because even though George III was alive at that point, he was declared insane by Parliament, and so the Prince of Wales basically was acting as king, you know? So he's up in this high authority system. He doesn't, like, Percy doesn't have to go anywhere or do anything, but he chooses actively to save people and to put himself in danger, and I felt a lot of that with Jesus, and I think when we have a character like Batman, when we have a character like Sir Percy, I respond to them quite strongly, and I feel like that's because there's something in us that loves that part of someone coming to save us, you know, and it's because we are meant to turn towards Jesus and with everything that he's done for us. So that's where I see, like, the main thing with it in Scarlet Pimpernel, and I think too of, like, you know, the misunderstandings of the relationship with his wife, where she just doesn't know him, she doesn't trust him, and she has to learn to look past the and see underneath this outward character that he's put on for the rest of the world, and really understand, oh wow, he is a really wonderful guy, and it makes me love him more. And I think too, like in our relationship with Jesus, there's an active amount of trust that we have to have with him. And I struggle with that because it's obviously different because, he's not like a person like you that I can talk to, like, and see. And I think that's part of having faith and trusting and knowing that he knows best and he's doing everything for my good. So, yeah, that's where I see it. How about you?
That's a wonderful perspective. It makes me think of the verse that says, and I feel really bad, I don't know the reference, but
Come on, Alissa.
stop. His ways are higher than my ways. And it's like my thoughts are not your thoughts, and my ways are higher than your ways. Basically, the whole thing is just like you don't see the full perspective as God does. And I think that's a really interesting way of putting it, where Marguerite has to trust Percy even when she doesn't fully understand why he does what he does. And again, because Percy has some very like convoluted plans of saving people, but it works. It works, like disguising them as soldiers and everything like that. It all works out. So there is that. The piece of faith, and then there's the whole thing with their, like, again, the film is focused a lot on their marriage and just a healthy marriage, because it was easy for Marguerite to either divorce him or Percy to divorce Marguerite, or for Marguerite, I mean, it's pushed on her to have an affair with Paul, but she stays true to him, even when it's pressured upon her and Paul's kind of giving her that way out. So I think that there's the importance of marriage that comes from the movie, as well as, like you said, just the thought of having faith in one's husband or having faith in Christ. Again, Percy's not a perfect character. His marriage could have been resolved very quickly if they just communicated. But with Jesus, he's perfect, but we don't always understand why he does what he does, and that's where faith has to come in. And that's where you build that relationship.
I like how they talk about the sense of confiding in each other as in a relationship, and I think that is part of having a good relationship with Jesus, is confiding, is not just going to him with, oh, I need help with this, but just telling him what's going on. And in a healthy marriage too, you can't just be like, oh, I need this, oh, I need that. You have to just walk with them day to day. And they talk about that with Marguerite. It's like, oh, if you would confide in me as you used to. And she says, well, how am I supposed to, I don't believe that you're going to take this seriously or be a man that could rise to the occasion to deal with my problems. And so it really does start with, you have to have that vulnerability to have a healthy relationship. And I think it's such an interesting situation that they both didn't do that at the beginning of their marriage, and then once they started being more vulnerable and once they started trusting each other, then they were able to build something again. So yeah, I think if I'm going to pivot, I feel like I got to ask you, Alissa, would you recommend this as a double feature to our wonderful listeners?
I would. I think they both fit into the identity, with one Percy having to hide who his true identity is, because that's just the oath he swore by. That's their thing. They have to pretend that they are the least likely person to save or be a hero. Yeah. And then on the other side, with Batman Returns, that movie is all about masking. You have Bruce not knowing who the real Bruce Wayne is. Is it him or is it Batman? And being in denial of who it is. Selina trying to figure out who her identity is after going through trauma. And also Penguin. I mean, that's what you could honestly say about all of them. They've all gone through trauma. Bruce lost his parents. Selina was abused. And Penguin was rejected by his parents. And it's their decisions on what they want to do and putting on masks for other people. So with Penguin being the mayor and being this child of neglect who's trying to become the golden boy of Gotham, but in reality, he's just a vile, disgusting creature. Selina putting on a display of control and sexuality when really she's still insecure and doesn't know what she's doing. And then with Bruce being like, okay, is vengeance what leads me, or is it, love? So I think that they both suit each other well. Having said that, though, I would not say that every person would. I feel like Scarlet Pimpernel is family friendly. Batman Returns is not. It may offend you. There is a lot of violence and a lot of sexual innuendos. So it may not be for everybody. But I say, yeah, they could pair together. If not, I would just say watch the first two Batmans, especially because you'll understand the Vicky story plot a little bit more in the second one. What about you, Libby?
So that's really interesting because I had tried to tease out of you, what you thought about it before we started recording, and I thought what you were going to say is that they didn't work together very well. And I was thinking about that more, and I do agree with you where there are some ways that they work together really well as a double feature, and especially just even considering that Scarlet Pimpernel is what inspired a lot of these films. I have to say though, I think because for me, like because the two main characters were so vastly different, and I think it's really just like this version of Batman. I think Batman as a character overall does pair very well with the Scarlet Pimpernel, but this specific movie, it's like it's just kind of there's not enough there if we're just talking about like the two main characters. And so I think for all the points that you listed, yes, it is a good thing. But honestly, with all of our conversations about Catwoman, I really think a better like pairing movie would be 9 to 5. Have you seen that one?
I love 9 to 5.
Yeah, which I mean, we're gonna have to watch that movie sometime on the podcast. But I just think that and it's interesting how it was made about pretty much maybe like a decade or less together. But I feel like if we're talking about the character of Catwoman and everything that she goes through, 9 to 5 would be a fantastic movie.
I think that is one of the best double feature ideas ever, 9 to 5 and Batman Returns. I think that is such a good idea. I want to add one to that, though. I would say Scarlet Pimpernel and The Legend of Zorro. They both have the man of mystery, being a hero.
Man, Alissa, if I had that as a double feature, I think I would just like die of happiness. Those are two of my favorite movies. Like The Mask of Zorro is my favorite movie. So, yes. The other one that I was potentially thinking of, but I wasn't like super into, like your suggestion is much better than mine, but I was thinking like maybe something like Argo would be really interesting with the Scarlet Pimpernel, but I don't know if it's like too serious, but I think never mind. Mask of Zorro is fantastic.
No, I think the Argo one would be interesting just because of the disguises. Because, I mean, that's the highlight for me of Scarlet Pimpernel is just them going on their little disguises. And I just love Argo. So anytime you say, let's watch Argo, I'm going to be like, yes, let's watch it right now.
All right, well, I think that is our episode on the Scarlet Pimpernel and Batman Returns, unless there is anything else that you would like to add to these movies.
Nope, I would just say if you can watch them, great. They're both very fun. You can watch Scarlet Pimpernel on YouTube. And I believe Batman Returns is on Max.
Thanks for listening to Girls Offset, the podcast where you can count on the Christian, female, and film industry perspective. Have a blessed day, and we'll see you next time.
Syncman.